Right. Good morning, everybody. Yes, the broadcast went live without us knowing. Welcome to the Scrutiny Board for Environment, Housing and Communities. My name is Stuart Galton. I am Councillor for Rothwell Ward and I'm chairing this meeting. And we'll now go around the table to introduce the other members of the Scrutiny Board and our support officer.
Good morning, Councillor Dowson. I'm from Chapel Allerton Ward.
I'm Councillor Kate Haig and I represent Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Abdul Hanan from Headingley and High Park.
Good morning, folks. Councillor Adrian McCluskey, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Karen Renshaw from Marsden Robin Hood Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward, and attending as a substitute today.
Good morning, Councillor Shaf Ali from Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Good morning, Ryan Stevenson from the Harewood Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Barry Anderson, Edlin Wharfdale Ward.
Hello, Becky Atherton, Scrutiny Advisor to the Board.
Start by welcoming students from the Leeds Trinity University who are studying for journalism, and it's nice to have a decent audience for a change. For those people on the webcast, you won't be able to see them, but there is a phalanx of at least 20 watching us today. So hopefully that will keep us on our toes and make sure that we're offering good value as a Scrutiny Board panel. So we'll now go through to the items on the agenda. Item 1.
There are no appeals today, Chair.
Item 2.
There are no late items. Sorry, I should say no items for exclusion.
Item 3.
There's no late items either.
Item 4. Any declarations of interest from our board members? Okay. Item 5. Apologies.
We've had apologies from the following board members. Councillor Norma Harrington, Councillor Ryan Stevenson is attending as a substitute. Councillor Luke Farley, Councillor Eleanor Thompson is attending as a substitute. We've also had apologies from Councillor Annie Maloney this morning. And in addition, Councillor Ritchie has asked to have his apologies noted. He is unwell for the item on the street charter. And Councillor Pryor has asked that his apologies be noted in respect of item 10. And Councillor Martin will be representing him today as his support member.
Thanks for that, Becky. We'll now move on to the minutes. Has anybody got any items to raise in the minutes? No? Are we happy as a board to accept them as a correct record? And that's proposed by Councillor Haig and seconded by Councillor McCluskey. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to the work programme. For those who need to be informed, other than the board members, the work programme, of course, is there to make sure that as a Scrutiny Board we are covering what we should in terms of the subject matter that we cover, but also to make sure that we're also covering our responsibilities in terms of making sure that the Council has access to us if there is a particular item of urgent interest that comes up. I haven't had any items of urgent interest raised with me to be added to our work programme. Are there any other areas you wish to raise as board members? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on now. And we will move on to our first business item. And that is to discuss radon gas testing. In attendance we have Councillor Harland, who is the Executive Member, James Rogers, who is the Director of Communities, Housing and Environment, and Adam Crampton, who is the Head of Asset Management. For background, this was an item which was raised by a concerned resident in Leeds and was sponsored by Councillor Dixon from Middleton Ward for us to be proposed to investigate, and the board member accepted that task. It's now been 2 years since we had our initial investigation, and this is the substantive report back on the conclusions of that work. I will now hand over to Councillor Harland if she wishes to introduce the island.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll leave this to Adam and his wide knowledge of the subject that's in there. But thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Getting straight into the report, firstly, I'd like to thank the resident that did raise his concerns. We've traditionally in the city had a knowledge of radon gas, but haven't done any physical testing. So this was the first opportunity that we've had to do some physical testing and actually back up what we've got from a theoretical perspective. So the first couple of sections within the report cover a bit of the background information that's previously been presented to Scrutiny Board. The key points to note there are the target level for radon gas, which is 100 becquerels per metre cubed, and the action level of 200 becquerels per metre cubed. So if we jump to section 4, the report is where we get into the summary of our findings to date. So at the time of the report, 187 tests have been completed. Rather frustrating that that's 187 against our target of 188. 15 tests are ongoing that we're expecting results back from early in 2026, and we've had 76 tests abandoned. That's where things like damaged or lost items. So 187 is kind of our completed tests sample size. So of those 187, 165 have come back below the target level, 13 between the target level and the action level, and we have had 9 results returned above the action level of 200 becquerels. That 9 tests represents just under 5% of our total sample size. All of those properties have received some intervention. Generally, it's additional passive ventilation or unblocking existing ventilation. We've retested all 9 of those, and they are all now under the action level. So those interventions have been successful. Of the 13 between the target level and the action level, we followed the UK Health Security Agency guidance around specific circumstances of residents, and we've put interventions in place where appropriate to do so. Our proposals for the next stage, then, is a slight deviation from the original proposals that we brought to Scrutiny Board a couple of years ago. We were, I'll be dead honest, hoping to come back and say, given the level of risk is negligible, we don't really need to do any more testing, but we're not in that position, and we're not making that recommendation. It's clear from the testing that we've completed to date that the Morley area is the higher risk area. So we're proposing to, like I say, deviate from our original proposals and undertake a targeted inspection programme in the Morley area with the aim of achieving a 10% sample size of all Leeds City Council owned homes in that area. There's some stuff that we need to do to make our processes more efficient in doing that. So a targeted communication strategy. We're looking to engage with the local ward members in that area. Looking to engage with our tenant scrutiny board in order to get some feedback on them about how we can sort of encourage and maximise participation. And also very much worth noting that we continue to work with our colleagues in public health within Leeds City Council around the considerations of the implications of our work on other housing sectors, owner-occupied, private rented, for example, and public health colleagues are supportive of the recommendations that we're presenting today, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Dowson.
Just 2, and one is 76 tests abandoned. Seems like quite a lot, and when you look, it's due to lost or damaged equipment or people changing their hours. It might be quite interesting to see, because I don't know how expensive this equipment is. To have it lost might be quite taxing on the budget and prevent you doing further tests for other people. And secondly, it's with regard to, you went very quickly through what's happening with private tenants or residents or owners. If there's a cluster of, and it tends to be in clusters, what communications are we actually giving to people in that area to have their own homes tested, and what advice are we giving? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So, firstly, the equipment itself is relatively inexpensive. We purchase all our equipment directly from the UK Health Security Agency. Relatively inexpensive, but still the level of abandoned tests is higher than we'd like it to be. So that definitely is forming part of our ongoing kind of communications and engagement strategy. Not only how do we encourage initial participation, but then what additional support do we need to kind of reduce those levels as much as possible. With regard to your second question, Councillor, and the kind of wider implications, that's certainly where we're working very closely with our colleagues in public health. I think it's fair to say I think the sample size that we've got at the moment is maybe not statistically valid enough for us to start extrapolating that across particular areas. So that's why we're looking, particularly in the Morley area, to get a full 10% sample size of Leeds City Council owned properties. We regularly engage with public health colleagues, so they're aware, not just at these kind of intervals when we're reporting to Scrutiny Board, but throughout the process, so they can consider also the implications beyond housing Leeds properties. So what we're hoping to do is, when we've completed our 10% sample size, we can then extrapolate those results and consider the risks right across the area rather than just in Leeds City Council homes.
You mentioned working with public health colleagues, and I must admit, I wouldn't know what to look for. And we are being broadcast. What are the symptoms of radon poisoning? When should you present to somebody in public health?
So the key risk is around lung cancer. So it can be linked to increased levels of lung cancer. Again, we've worked with colleagues in public health looking at the rates of lung cancer in the areas in which we're testing, none of which are outliers. They're all in that median range, which is kind of consistent with our levels of radon that are presenting. We have exceeded the action level in 9 of the tests that we've completed, but in relative terms, not hugely. So there are areas of the country where radon levels are significantly higher than we're testing, but nonetheless, it does exceed that action level. But sorry, to answer your question directly, Councillor, it's increased levels of lung cancer would be the kind of the key marker for us to be concerned about, which obviously can also be influenced by other variables as well.
Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, by referring to Morley, do you mean the Greater Morley area? So does that include Morley North, Morley South and Ardsley and Robin Hood? Or does that just look at Morley South?
Thank you, Councillor. It's the 2 Morley wards that we've tested in so far. We did complete what's called an advanced postcode list assessment. So that was, again, something that we commissioned through the UK Health Security Agency, UCSA. We commissioned that test, and that gave us a kind of risk rating for each of our, literally down to a postcode level. So then we've kind of aligned those to specific wards, and it's the 2 Morley wards that we're referring to, Councillor.
Can I just ask then, is there any possibility of Ardsley Robin Hood being included under what used to be? There used to be part of Ardsley Robin Hood that came under the Morley Housing Office. Part of it came under the Rothwell Housing Office.
Forgive me, I can't remember off the top of my head where the postcode list assessment kind of identified the level of risk there. If it's in that 3 to 5% risk category, there will have been some testing included. If it's in the 1 to 3% risk category, our proposal would be that, following, subject to Scrutiny Board accepting the recommendations of this report, that we move on to that 1 to 3% area next.
I would
okay,
like
thanks.
that to be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, so to follow on from Councillor Renshaw's inquiry, one of the things that's noted, of course, is that this is associated with geology, and it means that this isn't a problem which is consistent across the city and only occurs in particular areas. One of the things I would like to thank you is this shows that the council, when it wishes to, is nimble and responsive to public needs and can work cross-departmentally. So the work that you've done here with public health, I think, is a very good example of the council taking its responsibility as a landlord, and of course its wide responsibilities for the general well-being of the residents of Leeds very seriously. So we do appreciate that. I also think that hasn't been much discussion today, but I think that reflects that a lot of the discussion has taken place at the previous times this has been brought to the board, and we take note that you have offered to make sure that further discussions take place with ward members who are affected. And to get back to Councillor Renshaw's point again about what the geography and everything isn't coterminous with absolute ward boundaries, I'm sure that the Outer South Community Committee would be very happy to receive your report alongside us as Scrutiny Board members. We don't think it needs to be brought to us as an item for discussion, but we'd certainly like to have the final report for the information. And if there is any further discussion needed, it can take place at a community committee level, I would suggest. Are members happy with that and to accept the recommendations of the paper? Thank you very much. Right, we'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is certainly much more expansive than the previous one, and that is to receive the annual climate emergency update report for us as the Scrutiny Board, which looks after environment and the council's policy for the general well-being of the citizens of Leeds, as opposed to our own internal environmental policy. On the board today, we have Polly Cook attending, and we also have Councillor Katie Dye, who is the chair of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. Because climate is so important to elected members cross-party so far, we don't mind having two separate bodies giving oversight to the council's environment section in terms of what we are able to deliver for the city, and hopefully we are making sure that we are not duplicating but adding value to each other. And I look forward to hearing from Katie today about what the SEAC's priorities are, alongside the questioning that we have in terms of the report, which is here and is quite conclusive. So who would like to introduce this item?
Well, I'll make a few comments first. The first thing I hope you note from the report is that there has been a huge amount of progress in terms of the work that the council does. I think a lot of it goes unseen. It's quite kind of happening in the background, and it's really good that this report is here to show to people that we are making progress, that there's a lot of work going on, that not only is addressing our emissions, but is also significantly improving the lives of residents, particularly in terms of some of the work that's happening across our estates. In terms of what's coming up in the future, I think the links with the Leeds Climate Commission is particularly exciting in terms of our ambitions, and I think that's something that it would be good for you to have sight of as this work moves forward. So I'll leave it there from me, but I don't know if Polly or anybody else wants to come in with any further details.
Thank you, Councillor Dye. We've now been joined by Councillor Rafiq. He might want to add something as the executive member. Okay, over to you, Polly.
I think Councillor Dye did a beautiful introduction, so I almost don't want to ruin it, to be honest. If I start going any further, I'll be starting to go into the detail of the different schemes, so I think it's probably best that we leave it where Councillor Dye got us to.
Much appreciated. I know we have a lot of questions from board members. Who'd like to go first? Well, we have had interest around housing, and one of the areas that I noted as chair was that when we were talking about some of the work to do with our council housing, we are referring to schemes as far back as 2015. Can you give us any idea of whether we feel that the initial progress that was made last decade has not been matched by government schemes going forward that we've been able to participate in to make sure that our homes are better insulated and are able to produce their own microgeneration.
So I think there's always been a sort of continuation of schemes. The schemes change and the level of process behind them is always different. There's been some benefits in the sense that we've had 3-year settlements for things like the social housing fund. So that has definitely been better because we've only had to bid in once. There's never enough funding to do what we need to do with the level of housing that we've got, but there is still investment happening. And I think that's been fairly steady. But the reality is, if we want to hit where we want to get to in terms of our ambition, that level of funding needs to be a lot more significant to really make an impact.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm interested in the consistency of the energy efficiency upgrades. In my ward of Armley, we've had quite a few schemes that have started but then not been completed. So leaving kind of communities pitting against each other in a way, where flats, some flats have had the ground source heating pump, then others have been, the money has run out, so they haven't been upgraded. And also, one of the things that concerns me is around the energy efficiency cladding schemes, where on some estates decisions have been made to include private landlord properties and owner-occupied properties, with them paying just up to 25% for the schemes in order to create a positive visual impact. But in doing so, this is leaving some of our other residents in homes in council stock that are less energy efficient and leaving them in fuel poverty. So I just wondered around the decisions around that as well.
I'll take the second question first. So where we've done owner-occupied or private rented, that has been because most of the time the housing, the funding stream is excluded for social housing. So we've not chosen one over the other. Quite often there's more than one funding stream running at a time. And so, like, for example, at the moment, there's like the Warm Homes Fund and then there's the Social Housing Warm Homes Fund, and they both have different criteria. So things like the work that we've done in Holbeck, a lot of that was for the private sector or the home upgrade grant, or there'll be a cap on how much you can do in social housing. There's quite often different criteria. So we always try and maximise what we do within our own social housing. And I can't think of examples where we haven't done that. So
I think explicitly in the press release about the Cedars, it says that decisions were made around visual impact.
That's not a scheme I'm personally aware of, so I'd have to come back to you on that if there's a specific example. The ones that I've worked in, we haven't done that. And the same with the first question around the sort of social housing. I'd have to have a look specifically if there's examples, because most of the time we go in, we know what we're doing, and we've finished the whole scheme. So I haven't got you're obviously quoting examples where that hasn't happened. So it'd probably be easier if you can give me the specific details, and I'd have to probably go back to Adam, who's just left us. So.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Just to continue on the housing side of things, my ward was lucky to benefit very early on with the investment in energy efficiency on the Holtdale estate. Have we been able to put any values on what's actually been saved in terms of monetary values? How much is each tenant seeing a benefit of as a result of our investment? I know there'll be carbon, but you can't put a value on monetary value on carbon. So in terms of addressing cost of living, how more better off are my residents as a result of it?
I do have the figures, and I have the figure in my mind, but I'm dreaded to say it because if I get it wrong. It's significant. It's in the tens of percentages. But let me come back and clarify that, because that scheme was finished quite a long while ago, but we have got that data, so I'm happy to share with the board afterwards rather than me guess.
The school that I'm a governor at, Cookridge Holy Trinity, again benefited from some measures, but the governing body have now made the decision to switch off the ground source heat pump because it was costing them far too much money. Now, I know Polly's been involved in this debate, so she is aware of the debate, but how come we got ourselves into a position where a school took advantage of government money and council money, implemented it fully, but are now of the opinion that it's costing them too much? Because if it was the way they were using it, fine, your staff would have been out and would have explained to them you're using it the wrong way. So how are we in a position like this now? And is this just my school, or are there other schools as well fighting the same problem?
Actually, Polly, before you come in, I am lucky to be a governor at another school where we are also looking forward to the investment to introduce air source heat pumps and to look at photovoltaics, although our roof might not be able to take it. But I believe that it isn't intended to be a money saver so much as a carbon reducer. So it would be interesting if there is a perception that the price actually will go up, because I don't think that was in the equations that have been offered to schools like ours.
No, so the scheme is designed to be break-even. It's not designed to be a money saver. And that's why we've added solar into the scheme, because without solar there is a risk that it would go up. So I'll have to go back. I thought we'd got to the bottom of Cookridge, so if you're telling me we haven't, I'll have to go back and have a look at that with the team. So, but in theory they should all be on a break-even basis, because we did the full cost modelling about how they operate and where they come. So we've had challenges sometimes where the secondary heating system isn't then good enough, so it can't cope with there's inefficiencies already developed within the system that we have to go back and do some further work on, but we seem to have worked through that with most sites, so I'd have to have a look at that.
Thank you. Councillor Dowson.
On a completely different subject, it's with regard to the carbon capture. You've got a 38% decrease, which is absolutely a phenomenal figure, and well done for that. I'm particularly looking at tree canopies. I know we've got quite an extensive tree planting programme in place in Leeds, and we're part of the White Rose Forests. So two questions in one. Can you tell us now what our ambitions are, what the plans are for the next few years, and how we're going to increase that tree canopy, which does actually contribute quite heavily to the carbon capture? And secondly, it's with regard to habitat, because you've got reference here to the Leeds Habitat Company. And I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about that as well, because the habitat element, especially as Leeds is such a vastly, fast-growing city, how are we going to ensure that all areas of the city will benefit from that? Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the tree planting, every year we go out with a range of schemes. I think this year we're on track to do between 20 to 25 hectares. We never know for definite until we get to the end, because sometimes other issues come up with tree planting that we're not aware of. So there's a scheme that goes on every year. We advertise and ask people to put forward spaces. That is becoming more challenging in terms of starting to run out of our own land and having to look elsewhere, but we'll continue to keep doing that, and that has seen an increase. And actually at the moment we don't reflect the reduction of carbon based on that. That's not reflected in the reports. That's like an added bonus. In terms of the habitat banking vehicles, there's two things. There was the pre-mandatory BNG, where we've already started doing schemes, so things like, for example, Armley. There's an area in Rounday, and that was where we got money through developers to start re-establishing wetlands or different types of grassland to help reinstate different species. So that work is already underway. with a management plan against it. The habitat banking vehicle at the moment has been targeted at specific parts of the city, and that is where we think it best matches what's likely to come through through development. So, for example, Otley Shevin has a really wide range of different habitats. We've got, I think, Rothwell Country Park, Skelton Lake, Killingbeck Fields. So all of those currently are put in the scheme. There's no limit on what we put in, but we have to lease the land to the habitat banking vehicle to undertake the work and then sell the credits against that. So it's trying to match what developers need in terms of habitat type and making sure that we're able to offer it, and looking where we think actually it will work best with the use of that place. So somewhere like Otley Shevin that is kind of a sort of naturally managed location, biodiversity net gain is really helpful because it just makes sure that we're managing habitats in the best way for nature. So that is a real opportunity in terms of a way of sourcing in extra funding as well to help. But there is opportunities to add in other places, but we're kind of doing it in stages.
Councillor Dye.
Thank you. And can I just come in and add the Trees for Schools project as well, which I know all schools have been emailed about and so have members, but all Leeds schools are eligible to join the scheme, and they can collect packs of free trees to plant in their grounds. And the package also includes a visit to the area later in the year. So it'd be really good if people could help to promote that amongst the schools that you have association with. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, please, around sustainability of our tree planting programme in association with the Leeds Habitat Company proposal that's in the paper? You mentioned Rothwell Country Park and Skelton Lake, which I'm very familiar with as a ward member. One of the things that we're very frustrated by in these landscapes is that actually there is no maintenance plan for their, well, in terms of any kind of maintenance whatsoever. So I appreciate they're a wildlife habitat, but parkland isn't just for nature, it's for people to enjoy nature. And without a decent capacity to maintain and to make such habitats people friendly, then we're missing a trick, aren't we, in terms of parks not just being there for plants but also for people. Is there any prospect of the Leeds Habitat Company being able to deliver any human capital as well as money for trees to get planted so that there are more people to help manage these spaces?
It provides money for the maintenance of whatever improvement you make, so it won't provide money for the whole like maintenance or litter picking or things like that. But it allows us to improve pathways linked to where the biodiversity net gain improvements are done, or signage, and then it would allow sort of an annual maintenance programme linked to that specifically. It won't suddenly double our park staff to manage our green spaces. With that, we manage the best we can with what we've got.
Well, considering there's one ranger, doubling it to 2 would be quite good. Councillor Haigh.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to look at the part of the report which talks about risks and how being clear about our communications is such an important part of this. And I think we've seen across the report that not only taking action on climate is bringing those benefits, but it's also bringing other benefits, in terms of fuel poverty, habitat, access to good quality green space across the city, and of course we've had the recent Green Council of the Year award. So what is it more that we can do, and as a council and as members in talking about the real benefits of this? Because I know out there on the in the wilder parts of the internet, you know, people challenge the need for net zero and climate action. You know, we have the evidence in front of us and we see the work we're doing. You know, how do we mitigate that risk of taking the public with us on that journey?
So this year, as part of SEAC, we've got a separate member working group, looking at comms and engagement as a specific theme. And in fact, we're meeting this afternoon. As part of that, we're looking, so we've got Leeds by Example, which is a website that was set up when we declared a climate emergency. But we're doing a complete refresh with 2 students from Leeds University who've come to do a 100-hour placement with us each, are leading that work and looking at how we can make it more meaningful, how we can better reflect the work in it. So that's kind of a first step, but I think through the working group we're looking at all different ways, and I know the Leeds Climate Commission is doing a load of work as well on that.
Councillor Dye.
Yeah, well, Polly's said pretty much what I was going to say. It's been a huge focus for us in SEAC this year because we're well aware of exactly your point, Councillor, that the work that the council's doing isn't as well known as it should be, and we really welcome opportunities to share that, and also the point you made as well about some narratives are moving in the wrong direction in terms of climate. So it's something that the workshop has been, as Polly said, just focusing on, and will come out with some tangible things that we can make a difference with, for example, an improvement of the website, but also looking at some of our comms messages and how we improve those. And as Polly said as well, the Leeds Climate Commission is working on the same topic, and it's something that any support from any of you, including coming along to today's workshop, but also anything you can do really to share messages about what the council's doing, about the benefits of the work to people's lives, and things that you've seen in the report, like the Leeds pipes. You know, you'd be amazed at how many people have no idea what that is, what a huge difference it's making in terms of our emissions, but also, you know, the awards that we've won as well. So yeah, please share, and please come along to the workshop. But also, if you're not able to do that, let any of us know of anything that you think we could do better at in terms of our messaging, because we will most definitely take you up on that. Thank you.
Councillor Rafiq.
I mean, I think there's a role for everybody to play in this. As a council, we are kind of leading on this work nationally. Hence, we got the Green Council of the Year award as well. But apart from that, I know we are one of the top core cities when it comes to climate change and reducing emissions. But this is a journey, and there's so much more to be done. I think, you know, internally we're doing really well, but we're not the only, you know, player in town. There's communities, businesses, every household has to do something, and it is very much about messaging and people doing their bit and understanding as well, you know, why it's important, you know, the benefits of the environment, the benefits financially in terms of addressing, you know, the cost of living crisis, the savings, and all that. And I think it's about people understanding and having a buy-in as well. And at the moment, I think just because of what Councillor Dyer said, because of some of the counter narratives, not just in our country but globally as well, there are doubts in people's minds, and I think that's for us to kind of to get the right messages out. But that's all of us and all the people out there, and this is what we were saying the other day when we had a State of the City meeting with our partners as well and businesses, that there's got to be a buy-in from everybody. But yeah, I mean, we are doing well, but there's a long way to go.
Thanks. On that area, one of the traditional ways for people to participate in the way you just mentioned is to volunteer. So, sorry to revolve around the example of Rothwell Country Park again. Because there is only one ranger covering about 8 of these wildlife parks, whenever volunteer activity happens and that person happens to be off sick, the volunteering doesn't happen. So I think there's a sustainability issue there in terms of keeping up the consistency of enabling people to participate and volunteer in their green spaces. The Leeds Habitat Company is also, of course, taking on private sector contributions to deliver biodiversity gain outside of the developments that the private sector is building, and we're helping them to fulfil their commitment. The corporate sector is also very useful in terms of their corporate social responsibility programs to deliver volunteering as well. And a lot of those volunteers have taken part in tree planting, haven't they? Can we have any clarification whether their rumours are right that we might all of a sudden start charging for corporate volunteering in terms of future budgeteering? Because that would be a little bit of an alarm bell, I think, for us in terms of enabling people to do things for free. And lastly, on this Leeds Habitat, one of the things that's notable about Rothwell Country Park, as it's deteriorated over the years through lack of maintenance, is that the biodiversity has got less diverse. So our ponds have dried up or choked up. The meadows are no longer meadows because they're not being mowed regularly, and now they're full of thistles and brambles. And areas that were grassland, and we're told how valuable grassland is for all those insect species that help to pollinate crops and whatever, they're now being planted over with trees. So how do we ensure that our biodiversity plan isn't just a tree planting plan and is actually about diversity of biodiversity? Thanks.
Okay, like any council department, we have so much resource and we try and find our best way of using it. I mean, one of the things we look to do with our ranger capacity is actually to help groups to become self-sufficient. So there's lots of examples around the city where volunteering happens with very minimal input from staff. So there's they will help with things like the risk assessment or provision of materials or things like that. So that example that you gave of somebody being off ill doesn't become the be-all and end-all. And the reality is that's where we need to get to, that there is a high level of self-sufficiency, because we do not have the money to fund the level of ranger resource that we would need. We already charge for corporate volunteering. That's already in place. That came in maybe March, April time. And we are still seeing volunteering groups, corporate volunteering, taking that up over the winter, as you've said, about the tree planting. And part of that was to try and address the issue that you'd raised about actually being able to have enough ranger capacity and not having to make those cuts on that in order to make our budget meet. In terms of the question about balancing all different types of biodiversity, well, I suppose that's the exact purpose of having the habitat banking vehicle and the pre-mandatory and mandatory BNG. It allows us to do that balance. We do, if we have bigger tree planting sites, there's a whole environmental impact assessment that has to be done to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing for that place. And sometimes the answer is that it isn't, and we do something different. So there have been occasions where we've stopped tree planting because actually there's a stronger biodiversity case for something different. So I think we are balancing that as best as we can within the resource that we have.
Thanks. Councillor Anderson.
When we started doing all of this work, in the UK we were producing approximately 1% of the world's climate problems. What is the current figure that you're aware of? And hopefully it's reduced down. But more importantly, Councillor Rafiq mentioned, which I agree with, that relative to some other cities we are doing well, but are we in this area in Leeds producing more or less carbon problems? Despite all the good work that's been done by the council, I'm So in other words, I'm pointing the finger at other partners, shall we say. We've done our bit. Is there a problem or not?
I'm just looking that up, Councillor Anderson, to come up with an answer, because I don't know in terms of the numbers, but it does say the UK accounts for less than 1% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions. I took a quick search. How accurate that is, I don't know, because it's taken me 2 seconds to look at it. But I think my point would be, whatever the actual number is, it doesn't reduce the urgency of addressing the problem, and it doesn't, in my mind, affect how important it is for us as a nation and us as a city to do our bit, regardless of any other contributions.
What I'm getting at is, I agree with you, but what I'm saying is, do we need to put some more of our resources and efforts into becoming evangelists and getting other people in Leeds convinced of it? The council is doing its bit. I'm not criticising the council in anything, in any shape nor form. But if, as a whole, Leeds PLC is not making a big move, where are the blockages? You know, in other words, if the council's done their bit, where are the major blockages that we can make, you know, and the old 80-20 rule? Where should we be looking as an organisation now?
The big anchor organisations, we work with them across the climate agenda in terms of, you know, things like the hospitals, the universities. They are the biggest energy generators of the city. So we work with all of those quite closely to look at how we can speed up, how we can learn from each other. So I think that's really critical. I know in terms of our sort of bigger industry, there's lots of work already going on in terms of how some of those look to reduce their emissions. But the reality is every aspect of society in Leeds, nationally and globally, needs to be doing their part. So none of us can sort of slow down. It's more about how we support others to work with us. And we are doing that. We work across organisation.
Yeah, I think Councillor Anderson's raised a decent point there in terms of, I think sometimes we underreport our influence on the wider city and what they are able to do or are doing, for instance, with government support sometimes, to enable them to be more climate responsive employers. And it should be part of our economic growth strategy. And it might be worth adding some of that value into reports for next year, for instance, to show how the private sector is also adding to the climate change results. Councillor Dye.
I was just going to add 2 things, but firstly, yes, I think that's a very good idea. One was on Polly's point about the anchor institutions. We've had several present to SEAC, and it really is quite illuminating and really reassuring to look at the fact that, as you say, it isn't just work in the city being done by the council. There's some really brilliant work being done by some of the huge anchor organisations. We had a great presentation from teaching hospitals, from Leeds University, who are doing a lot of work on their own emissions, and clearly that affects the whole Leeds picture. And then the last thing I was going to say was, in my introduction, I said that it was great that we've got the Leeds Climate Commission as our key convener for the ambitions, sustainability work, and I think that's going to be a big focus of the work over the year, is looking at what's happening across the city that will affect our emissions as a city, but isn't directly work that the council's doing.
Thanks. Councillor Dowson.
Thank you, Chair. If I can move over to vehicles now, and it's really comforting to think that, is it 45% of our overall van fleet is now electric. In fact, I think we're one of the best. We have the biggest fleets in the country. You might want to correct me on that. But only 28% of the whole fleet. So I'm wondering what our ambition is and what the problems are in getting that eventually up to 100% of our fleet being electric, and on the back of that, our residents in a lot of areas where people live in back-to-back houses and so on, we're encouraging people to buy electric vehicles and so on. But the infrastructure for actually charging electric vehicles is quite dire in a lot of areas, and you can trawl along to public chargers and you might have to join a queue. I know there's apps you can use. But I understand that as of today, we've signed a contract with a company so that people who actually live in back-to-back houses who want to charge their electric vehicles at home using some of the offers that some of the companies give, therefore bringing the costs down, can actually now do so through an application process in the council. I'm wondering if you know about that also, and if you can give us a few more details, please. Thank you.
Yep, so in terms of the first question about, fundamentally it's the larger fleet, so things like the refuse vehicles or the 3.5 tonne tippers and things like that. And we have got 3 electric refuse vehicles that are running, and the first indication seems to be that they're working really well. Operationally, I think it would be foolish for us to jump in and sort of replace the whole fleet on that until we've let them trial out, in case in a year's time they start to deteriorate or, you know, they don't work as well over winter. So the service is just doing a really comprehensive trial before we start to increase our numbers of electric. But the intention is to increase our numbers, but to make sure that when we do that, it has no service impact. And so that's the reason that, you know, the small van fleet is very well established, and, you know, there's been a lot of improvements over time in terms of the range on those vehicles, so it makes sense to focus our efforts there. But that doesn't mean to say that we're not ambitious on the rest, and we're looking at how we improve our charging infrastructure to enable that to happen. In terms of the scheme that you're announcing, we're over the moon that now residents can apply, so via the internet. And basically there will be checks done to make sure it's suitable. Not every single house will be suitable. There might be things like services in the way that prevent it, but it basically allows a channel to be put from somebody's house to the pavement and allows them to plug in their charger on an ongoing basis, allowing them to access their own home electrical charges. So all the checks and balances have been done on that, and that has gone live, like you said, just very late at the end of last week. So it's a massive step forward in terms of infrastructure.
Polly, can you clarify where that is and what the plans are for making it more available elsewhere after it's been tested?
So I think the original plan, so Highways have been leading on it. I think their first step is they're going to reach out to everyone, because we've had a lot of people waiting in the wings to be able to take this forward. So everyone that has already contacted the council about it will be contacted to make them aware that this scheme exists, and they will be prioritised because they've already been waiting. I think when we get to a point where we've worked through those, then we will start to publicise it. I don't know the link off the top of my head. I think it will be somewhere on Highways, but I can certainly send that out after this meeting.
Yes, that would be very useful, especially if it is citywide. Yeah. Councillor Rafiq.
That development is actually twofold. One is where people can have pavement gullies, to their properties where they could charge, but also there'll be charging points on streets as well. The very point that Councillor Dowson has raised in different parts of the city, particularly some of the areas, like for instance inner city areas are, so where anybody could plug in and charge. That's a major development. And just on that point, I think again, we after London, we've got the biggest EV electric vehicles registrations of any city or town in the UK. And we want to ensure that more people are switching to electric vehicles, and hence I think there's a need to roll out the EV infrastructure, EV charging infrastructure.
Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. It'll make interesting for the next subject on the agenda, which is a street charter. But with all the amazing work that has been done with climate work in Leeds, have we seen an improvement in air quality? A subsequent improvement in public health?
So in terms of air quality, yes, we've had a downward trend. So back in 2015, when I first started to get involved in air quality, we've just had a downward trend ever since then, primarily on NO2, because that's the one that is most widely measured across the city. Our measurement of PM is slightly more limited, but there is still a decline. There's areas of the city that I think for a long time have been air quality management areas. At one point we had 6. We are hoping that our last one will be declared as no longer an air quality management area, and we'll actually move out of that very shortly, because you have to have 3 years clear, and that was Poole in Wharfdale was the most stubborn area. But even that we think is now at compliance, so we've seen a massive improvement in trend. I can't comment on the health, it's not something I've looked at. We know that it has a knock-on effect through, but I haven't done that specific piece of work.
Thanks. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. 3 things, but I'll try and be really brief if that's okay. So one, concerns about biodiversity and developers and landowners trying to wriggle out sometimes many years after plans are approved. So a small example, a piece of grassland at Hyroids that's had horses on it, had plans written up for biodiversity. They seem now 9 years after the initial approval to be trying to dodge that again. I'll follow up separately on it, but just as an example. Huge thanks to Parks in the Outer Northwest for working with our volunteer groups and friends of groups. The work's been incredible in terms of coming in and doing the things that the volunteers can't do, and supporting and enabling and training them to do it. And that's been really beneficial for the biodiversity in our local parks, and really encouraging to see. Then lastly, more the question than the comment, about microgeneration and what are we doing to empower communities to take charge of it, so it's not just one house at a time, but say if a neighbourhood wanted to do solar together as perhaps a cooperative, are there any ways that we can support them to do that? Thank you.
So the first issue probably sounds more like a planning enforcement issue, rather than sort of linked to the habitat banking vehicle, but happy to speak with planning if that helps. I will pass on your thanks to the team, they'll be very grateful. In terms of the last one, West Yorkshire Combined Authority did a piece of work about buying like group purchase of solar, and it was popular, and they also did a loan, I can't remember if it was, I think it was a low interest loan, so people could buy the solar through them and also get a low interest loan. And we are just sort of talking with Wyker about whether there's any potential of doing that again, because that was popular. So I think that would be the best example at a residential level. And then I think there have been the sort of more talk about grants from Great British Energy around sort of community and things like that. And so obviously we'll watch out, and if we see anything, we try and promote it through voluntary action leads or organisations like that.
Thank you. Councillor Hannan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to talk about warm, affordable, low-carbon homes. And I welcome the news that there's 5.9 million of warm homes local grant funding available to the council. It says that you are going to improve 260 low-income private sector homes. Have they been identified? And you don't have to give me where they are, but have these properties been identified? And if not, is there a scope to maybe divert some of this funding to areas where there's a strong student population, where we know students live in some really appalling conditions? And could that be something that we could look at, diverting some of this funding to where students are living, if possible? Thank you.
So normally the funding, it will just have a set of criteria. So it will be about household income. It could be sometimes certain areas of deprivation automatically qualify regardless of household income. It could be certain benefits. So there'll be a series of criteria. So the way that we've approached it previously is we will sort of do our own mapping to try and identify homes. So we have data on sort of energy usage or energy performance of different homes. We have sort of deprivation data, we have salary data, and we try and layer all of that across, and then we will do targeted mail out to different homes or even door knocking to try and engage with people, because actually it's quite difficult to get that take up. So that's what we did on the home upgrade grant, and I think we'd probably go through a similar process for that. With the students, I'd have to double check the criteria for this one because obviously a lot of the students' home will be private rented. But I think private rented do normally qualify for this, but I think normally there would have to be a contribution. So we can certainly have a look at it, but it will be whether they fall into the criteria. So I'd have to get you the criteria to see.
I'm happy to have further discussions with you on that, Polly, if possible. I think it's a very important area that needs addressing. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
It's in respect of paragraph 26 in the report. I asked this question of the Chief Exec at WICA last week when we were talking about more investment in EV charging. Will the government's future taxation of EV cover vehicles and our vans as well? Will they have to start paying this additional tax?
Sorry.
I don't think we've got any, to be honest with you. I think the details are probably being worked out, but I don't think I'm not aware of us having any details of whether we'll be charged or not on our existing vehicles. I suspect it may be the new ones, but we're not, to be honest with you, we're not 100% sure at the moment. Yeah.
In fairness, WICA didn't know the answer either. The mayor was going to be tasked to go and speak to the Chancellor to find out what she actually meant by the measure, because it will have an effect on the investment strategy of WICA if it is, because it's going to be doing it.
Can I just come in, because I think I do. So our understanding and interpretation, because we've been doing a lot of work around the fleet programme, is that it only applies to cars. So I wouldn't swear my life on it. I wouldn't want anyone to go out and buy a van on the basis of me saying it. But my initial understanding and interpretation is that it's only on cars, and as a council we have very, very few cars, and actually we're moving away from cars for affordability reasons. So we don't think it's going to impact on us, but we are still doing the due diligence on that.
It was more the vans that were the concerns. You know, in other words, things that are actually smaller than some cars, to be quite honest, nowadays.
Okay, thank you very much. There's food for thought there. I think there's some definite areas where we would like to potentially have reports coming to us which reflect some of the tensions there are. So, for instance, the fuel poverty aspect and the need to get as many homes as possible well insulated so that the people inside them can spend more of their money on looking after their family as opposed to feeding electricity companies. It is useful, but that is a tension, because with the limited money that is available, if it's spent on photovoltaic tiles, less houses get insulated potentially. So I think it would be useful if we had some kind of reporting come forward in future around how we balance that out to ensure that as many people as possible are benefiting from the advantages of tackling climate change and whatever, and where sometimes the tensions are in terms of the money that we get in from government specifying what it's for, potentially. And of course that will also help with the EV areas as well, because of course people are ambitious and wish to participate in cleaner vehicles, but the ability to do so is going to be tempered by their ability to access infrastructure to do so. And then the area around community power that Councillor Thompson talked about, I think that's another area potentially for investigation, because there is a lot of work happening at the moment, isn't there, in terms of the national grid and being able to make that more accessible for commercial companies to produce energy via photovoltaics or wind, and that being a problem at the moment in terms of the capacity to take that on. But of course there are also lots of companies, and in Leeds we have a lot of distribution sheds in our logistics areas around our motorways, where those businesses would love to be more environmentally responsive, have photovoltaics privately bought by themselves on their buildings, and potentially able to offer that energy to surrounding communities if they have them. But once again, it's the issue around capacity onto the grid. So it'd be really good to know what we're doing as a council to address and enable some of those strategic tensions to happen in future as well. I appreciate, Polly, you're looking at me like, I've got enough on my plate, thanks. But, but it would be useful to know, because some of these things can be escalated up, can't they? And perhaps something to look at from the combined authority perspective, because they are going to have a bigger role in delivering regional infrastructure, aren't they? So thank you. That was really thought-provoking. Really appreciate the attendance from Councillor Dye as well, so that we can cross-reference our two groups. But I will bring that discussion to a conclusion now. Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move on to the next item. Does anyone want a comfort break at this point? Yeah. Shall we come back at 1:45?
Taking the agenda side down.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the second session of the Scrutiny Board for Environment, Housing and Communities. And we are on our final business paper, which is to discuss the Street Charter. This report outlines the work undertaken to date on a proposed street charter for Leeds and shares the draft document as it currently stands for discussion. This has been a piece of work which has taken several years to get to where it is, and we're hoping that the participation of the Scrutiny Board in its latest draft will ensure that it actually gets to the point where it is adopted formally by the Council and can therefore be embedded into Council Department's work. Today we have Councillor Emma Flint, who is the Executive Member responsible for Equalities. We have Councillor Lisa Martin, who is the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Transport Engagement Lead and is covering for Councillor Pryor, who can't make it because he has a prior engagement. We have James Rogers, who is the Director of Communities, Housing and Environment. Gary Bartlett, who is the Chief Officer of Highways and Transportation. And we have Jeff Turnbull, who is the Equalities Manager. And the rest of those attending can introduce yourselves as you talk about the paper, if that's okay. So, let's start. Who wants to introduce the paper? Is it Gary?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say a few words by way of introduction. I'm not going to go through the report line by line. But as you said, the report is an update on the Street Charter. Hopefully the report is self-explanatory. The Charter is attached as Appendix A. It does cover a wide range of issues across a number of directorates and teams and services. The draft that you see before you was developed through a series of collaborative multi-agency meetings convened by my service in Highways and Transportation. And from my service perspective, we have sought to embed our work in this area, in our day-to-day operations and or in our scheme work that we do, certainly on the major schemes, particularly through our Connecting Leeds work that many of you will be familiar with. And at paragraph 16, there are some examples where we've tried to embed our work. As you say, Chair, to date it has not been approved or published for a number of reasons that are explained in the report. So that this does give an opportunity, this meeting today, to certainly in particular to help clarify the governance and sign-off arrangements for the Charter, because it is so cross-cutting across the Council. And the report, via the recommendations, does highlight a road path to achieve this, which are included in the report today. And I'm happy to leave it there, Chair, to allow for debate and discussion and question and answers.
Okay, do we want to start with questions? Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the work on this. I agree that it's really much needed. I've done many a walkabout with residents in wheelchairs around Armley, and we've come across numerous problems and issues. The thing that I'm interested in is how do we guard against kind of reporting fatigue? Because I myself find that instructing residents to continue reporting and then going round in circles, that some people will report and they'll be told it's to report to the police, some to highways, and then there's often no feedback from the issues as to what's happening. And I find that people then get to a point where they just feel that they can't keep on reporting and reporting. Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham, can you just clarify what it is that they're reporting?
So general obstruction issues, whether it be parked vehicles, whether it be bins on the streets, whether it be street furniture, I think the whole host of things that you come across every single day when you walk around. Thank you.
I think in a way that sums up some of the issues that we faced in recent times, and what we intend to do now as part of this process is to actually revisit the draft as it is, and on the particular sections within the Charter, we want to put a clear contact point where people can report issues to, and those teams will be the point of accountability and responsibility for taking it forward. At the moment, in my opinion, it's just too general and just leads to some of the issues that Councillor Cunningham has highlighted. So the 3-month pause that we're looking for as part of the recommendations is to allow us to be more precise and targeted in terms of contact information. Now, and then it will be up to services then to deal with the issues and anything that remains outstanding accordingly.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's much needed. And then I guess my concern following on from that is, are the resources around the enforcement, particularly on the council side of things, just having that awareness that in our environmental teams they're very understaffed. Thank you.
Again, you're touching all the issues that have focused the mind as part of this process. Absolutely, and as officers, we would have to flag up concerns around if we suddenly got inundated with hundreds of requests for dropped curbs or removal of thousands or hundreds of black bins would be presumably an issue for refuse. So that all needs to be managed because, as we know, resources are tight, both in terms of staffing and financial resources. But it'll be then a question of prioritisation and dealing with it accordingly. So, yeah, these are some of the issues that have led to some of the delay with the publication of a charter, because we don't want it to be meaningless.
Yes, and the publication of the Charter leaves several areas for resolution, which I'm very grateful that you have articulated in the introductory paper. And I'm sure that we'll get to those at some point in the debate. I didn't want to leave Councillor Renshaw out at this point. Do you want to come back in?
Thank you for that. I'd just like to ask about where parts vehicles on pavements, and I don't think there's enough officers to deal with that issue throughout the city. And then I know of residents who have to go onto the main road to get past. I know where there's drop curbs that don't actually face across the road but lead into the middle of the road. So any visually impaired resident can't get a safe crossing because the drop curbs point onto a main road. And I didn't know if there was anything that could be done about that. But it's more of a concern is where the drop curbs are, people are going up and parking, and then residents can't get on the pavement and they have to go around the vehicle and then along the road. And it's a real concern.
Good morning, everyone. Nicholas Hunt, Traffic Engineering Manager. Pavement parking is an issue across the city and nationally as well. So you'll be aware that in London they have national powers in regards to pavement parking. There was a consultation exercise that was undertaken. It was 5 years last month where that consultation, Department of Transport, ended. And we are still waiting for guidance to see if that London approach will be rolled out nationally. I'm aware, I've had a look before I came here, so the pavement parking bill has had its first reading in the House of Commons, and the second reading is due in January 2026. So hopefully we're moving forward to a national approach to this problem. In respect of physical obstruction of the highway, there's only the police that have the statutory powers to issue penalty tickets. Everyone has their own interpretation of what obstruction is. A lot of these estates were built when the car ownership was low, and at the moment you'll go there and you'll see some drivers that park half on the pavement, half on the carriageway, try not to obstruct either. Sometimes they do. It's the police that we seek assistance with in regards to enforcing that type of issue. In regards to drop curbs, be that for vehicles or for pedestrians, our own internal parking services now have the powers to issue penalty tickets for that, and they do have mobile units that drive around the city targeting those type of issues. So if a resident or a community has an issue...
Sorry, I think I might have missed something there. Who are these people that have mobile units? Can you just clarify that again?
Parking services have mobile enforcement teams that drive around outer areas of the city. So, for instance, for yourself, councillor, the lay-by issues in your ward, that's where parking services go out in their mobile teams.
We'll return to that in more detail.
Okay. So that's where we're at the moment in regards to pavement parking. So I think all local authorities are waiting for a national guidance on this so that we can take that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Dowson.
Yeah, it's just on that very issue. And I suppose really it boils down to being a good neighbour and a good resident. There's a big difference, I feel, because lots of our streets, well, a majority of our streets were built before cars, and some of them are very narrow, which leads to huge problems. There's a difference between pavement parking, as in you're not blocking the road, and obstruction of people who are vulnerable getting down that road. And it's how we actually manage that and enforce when needed obstruction. And I recognise it lies with the police, who are similarly quite short-handed, I feel, in doing that kind of thing. They're very busy doing other things, and they sort of seem to think this is a secondary thing. Is there any way that the council could potentially get powers to use its common sense and actually deal with issues where they cause a real problem to our residents and force them, as Councillor Renshaw said, out into the road, as opposed to residents who park partly on pavements but don't block the pavement itself?
Yes, so local authorities at the moment have traffic regulation order powers that can issue a no pavement parking order. So in Leeds we've done one, and that was where a blind lady kept getting obstructed and was forced to go into the carriageway. In the first instance, we would ask the police to go out and do enforcement action. If their prolonged enforcement didn't solve the problem in the longer term, then we would look to add that to our traffic regulation order process and promote an order. So in that one, that solved the problem. We promoted the traffic regulation order, and then parking services went out and enforced that restriction. But yeah, we do have the powers, but we haven't got a blanket approach, so it would be site by site. But we do look at these.
It's a supplementary, but with regard to cycles, because you also refer to cycles on pavements as well, which I'm assuming is equally against the law, although I don't know that. And I know you've just introduced, or are about to introduce, some kind of cycle restrictions in the centre of Leeds to protect pedestrians from cycles that can move quite quickly, especially if they're electric cycles. So has there anybody ever been prosecuted, or has any fines been issued to cyclists using the footpath? Bearing in mind there's a lot said on here about infrastructure, but if the infrastructure isn't there, you still shouldn't ride on the pavement. I'll leave that with you.
Yes, you are correct. It is an offence to cycle on the footway. That's why we try to provide segregated provision, or where we put shared provision, we've got to advertise a legal notice to say that we're changing the designation to a shared provision, and signs then are therefore implemented on the highway to inform both cyclists and pedestrians. But yeah, it's a growing issue, particularly e-bikes, which are able to be chipped, so their speeds increase significantly. I know we're working with City Centre Management, and ourselves are working with the police in regards to enforcing the illegal usage of some of these bikes in the city centre. And again, we've been seeking a national approach, but that's not been forthcoming, so we're trying to be innovative in trying to resolve this matter.
So the restrictions you've put in the centre of Leeds, could they not be Leeds-wide, so that any specific issues that pop up in any of our areas could be dealt with very quickly?
Well, if I've understood the question right, it's illegal to ride a cycle on a footway. So the police have that power to enforce it now. And in fact, going back many, many, many years, I remember being stopped cycling on a footway when I was a kid by a police officer. But as I say, it was many years ago.
I thought you were going to mention a clip round the ear roll as well. but there you go. Just for clarity's sake, I am aware that the officers who are talking to us today are primarily from the Highways Department because they took a lead in writing the paper. However, the principles which are within the paper are meant to show the commitment of the council corporately to a very significant equality characteristic in the city, because people with disabilities represent around about a fifth of our population. And the importance of the Charter is about setting out principles to which departments should be striving to be, to follow, yeah, in a practical manner. And sometimes there are going to be tensions in how those principles in this Charter get delivered. And we're not going to solve that today, and the Highways Department aren't responsible for some of those solutions, but we can discuss where some of those solutions should be sought, and that might be something which is as a result of the discussion that we have today. But primarily, our discussion today is to say that the Charter is going in the right direction, and that the Charter is potentially a good tool for us as councillors who want to seriously make sure that our city is equitable for all citizens, that this is an added layer of protection for one part of the population to ensure that they're not overlooked when decisions are made. So I'm sorry if I'm sounding a bit preachy there, but just to guide the conversation a little bit, enforcement is an issue, and I think we'll discuss it towards the end in terms of where our recommendations might be. And Councillor Haigh has an issue to raise around bins.
Yeah, thank you. But following on from your comment there, I would say that, I mean, it's not only people with disabilities who benefit from a clear and safe street scene, you know, families with young children in pushchairs, just generally who wants to walk in the middle of the road, especially if it's a busy one. It's a really important issue. And this is where I come to bins and this cross-council sort of responsibility of working together that I think we need to see. There's a couple of issues around bins. Obviously, if bins are missed, and I do recognise that's not unusual. It's not common, but it's not unusual. Residents are advised to leave bins out for 2 days, sometimes slightly longer. It could be over a weekend period. And how we manage that in terms of, you know, ensuring that pathways are kept clear in those circumstances. And we also have, certainly in my ward, streets where residents have to bring their bins out to the end of the street, and then you've got quite a number of bins together, which may then be causing obstructions. And, you know, is there work going to be underway to review what we can do in those circumstances to prevent there being an obstruction caused by those bins? You know, clearly where residents are leaving out bins when they don't need to, that's a slightly different issue, and that might come to an enforcement point. And we also have circumstances where, and this is more a kind of, it just gets quite unpleasant, where bagged collections are left out, sometimes for a little while as well, and then you get the breakage of the bags, the vermin, you know, all those things, which is pretty unpleasant for everybody, to be fair. So is there a bit of cross-council working there to look at how we deal with that? Because I see from the report that it was discussed.
I think so the commitments that are
detailed in the street charter all came around from that cross-service nature and discussions, and are considered at the time of that development. Oh, sorry, I'm David O'Donoghue, by the way, Transport Planning Manager. So they came from the cross-nature approach of understanding service commitments and capacity, and try to be realistic but also stretch the authority and provide a better environment for all, as you mentioned. I think there are examples of that cross-nature working. I know I'm stealing Nick's thunder really, but I know Nick and Refuse work together where there's specific problems with parking, for example, where that impacts on refuse collection. So they work together in terms of producing traffic regulation orders, which then in turn enables refuse to carry out the collections and reduces the timeline of the bins being on the street. So there are good examples, but I think, the commitments are there to be realistic, and we probably just need to check in with services and review those.
Of course, we do have the option to ask these particular equality characteristic questions of waste when they come to us and they talk to us about their performance management. We can ensure that we consider performance on this aspect of the service as important as the frequency of collection. I now have Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Looking particularly at page 71 in the report, I'm really pleased to see the acknowledgements of the massive damage that vehicles do to pavements, cracked tactile paving, especially where you've got drop curbs on the corner and it just gets completely mashed and becomes a trip hazard. And the damaged tree roots do. We want the trees, but they cause major trouble for our pavements. Something I've not noted here but observed quite a lot in our ward is unauthorised pavement crossings where people have put in driveways. They're driving across the pavement, multiple vehicles, but the lack of enforcement of those, sometimes because it's been there for years, nobody's done anything, it's too late. But certainly on long roads in our ward like Queensway, where you've got multiple people doing this on flagged paving, it causes a lot of worry. People talk in local running clubs about the Queensway curse because they trip over the paving so often. And in areas where you've got a lot of older people with disabilities, it is really challenging. So just wondering if that could be perhaps be picked up somewhere. But really welcome the talking about this and the ponding at dropped crossings, which again we see fairly frequently. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Chair. Just returning to the pavement parking bill that was mentioned earlier, because it's quite technical, but it's essentially a 10-minute rule motion, so a private member's bill. So it's essentially a 10-minute opportunity for a member to make a talking point, and then that's it. So when the House prorogues at the end of this session, that bill will die. So putting any great weight on it is unwise. But beyond that, I wonder, there is therefore the next King's Speech, which will have to be in draft, and only government bills survive. So it might be in turn for this committee to be lobbying government now to pick up the pavement parking bill and bring it forward as a government bill and give the strength from our point of view. So could we capture that as maybe a lobbying exercise from the board?
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. We have discussed this when we were looking at the street charter, the Vision Zero policy that highways have in terms of reducing casualties, and we, the board that looks after equality characteristics, we wanted to make sure that we gave our perspective on that, and that was primarily around how actually the biggest danger for disabled people is having to go into the road, into the path of vehicles, because the footpath that they rely on isn't passable. So we have had some discussion around pavement parking and its enforcement. And traditionally, as has been expressed earlier, it has always been council enforcement services can enforce double yellow lines, which are delivered by traffic regulation orders, and the police are responsible for the enforcement of obstruction, which is the only crime which can be associated with pavement parking. However, since then, when we did challenge this with West Yorkshire Police, they said councils do have powers to enforce pavement parking, and we couldn't understand that because we'd always been told they couldn't. And then I did get further clarification from a transport minister. I've forgotten her name now. And she pointed to a particular part of legislation which did allow for us to have pavement parking enforcement through traffic regulation orders. And that's when had correspondence with Nick Hunt there around why we don't have them in Leeds. Because, as you pointed out, there's only one in operation at the moment, which was delivered in Headingley Ward a decade ago, I understand. And I couldn't understand why we didn't have more of them, because it's potentially less intrusive than banning traffic completely from a street through double yellow lines. And I just wonder, the initial objection was cost, but actually it only costs £60 more than double yellow lines to implement. Is some of it an issue of professional resistance from other departments who would be asked to enforce those traffic regulation orders? Because I think the tension that we have at the moment in terms of all of the issues that we've raised, particularly around pavement parking, is who's going to go out and enforce it? Because, and everyone says they've got resource issues, and the police in particular say, well, we have neighbourhood policing teams and they've got much more important things to get on with than going out and doing someone for obstruction. However, if you're a disabled person and you cannot leave your house because your neighbours are blocking you in, that seems to be a very important thing to enforce, because otherwise you're a prisoner in your own home. So it's all about people's subjectivity of what is prioritised and what isn't in terms of what they need to spend their time doing. And for enforcement services, they might feel that they don't want to take that on unless they have to, because it's been nationally mandated, hence the legislation argument. So have we had any resistance to pavement parking as a traffic regulation order being implemented from internal departments on the council? Sorry for the long preamble to the question.
The simple answer is no. So when we promote any traffic regulation order, we share that with colleagues in parking services to make sure that they can enforce the restriction that we're proposing. And like the one in Headingley, for example, they were happy to support that and happy to enforce that. I think one of the issues that we have is it's very rare that we would look to prohibit parking on a footway and maybe not the carriageway, particularly in residential areas. So if we put WL lines down, those WL lines are enforceable to the centre of the carriageway and also to the back of the pavement. So there's not a need to do a bespoke no pavement parking order, because WL lines or any other restriction that's adjacent to the curb on the carriageway is enforceable on the adjacent footway. The one in Headingley was a unique situation in that we were happy to support people parking on the carriageway, but for some strange reason they continued to park on the footway, and therefore we promoted a restriction that just restricted pavement parking, but we're happy to support them parking on the carriageway.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I know the bikes have already been mentioned, but the police tell us that they can't stop the bikes for safety purposes. So how do we enforce people riding bikes on pavements? And also, nobody's mentioned about quad bikes and how we enforce those. And I just wondered if there are any meetings that went ahead with highways and the police, because the police can tell us one thing and then we get the opposite from highways about who's responsible for what. And I didn't know if any collaborative working went on between the police and highways.
In respect of quad bikes and antisocial driving, there's a citywide public space protection order that enables the police to go out there and enforce and stop that type of behaviour. It's not needed. They've got legislative powers to be able to do that anyway. It just strengthens their ability to stop and actually challenge some of this behaviour. In regards to the new initiative in the city centre, in regards to the prohibition of cyclists on Briggate, that's something that's been, highways are involved with that. It's a new thing that we will have to then consider how we're going to enforce that and who is going to enforce that. It's a movement violation, and therefore it would be the police that would stop the cyclists in that. Or we may consider something more innovative in regards to how we stop and challenge that behaviour. So it is a work in practice. I know the report has gone to Exec Board recently just to endorse that approach, so that we look to stop the next process is start the legal order process.
And how do we get the enforcement team to come to the outer areas, like the outer south?
Yeah, to be fair, I attend quite a lot of evening meetings where I will follow a police officer that just detracts and says everything is Leeds City Council's fault, and often I have to stand up and follow the police officer and educate a local police officer in regards to what their statutory duty is. Often they don't like that, but that is fact. In the city centre we get... so at the moment we are trying to get the police to educate a lot of their area sergeants and inspectors, so that information is then diluted down to the people that attend some of your area meetings, so that we have a consistent message, because there's a growing frustration that the police will say it's a low priority and therefore they'll pass it on to highways to find this solution, but the solution rests with them often.
That is what we do. And even
Your point's well made, Councillor Renshaw. I'm sure it's another line of inquiry we can take after the meeting. Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. Just a really quick one. As someone who's fairly new back on my bike, we've talked a lot about the kind of restrictions for cyclists around the city centre, but is there more work planned for actual more infrastructure to be able to cycle around the city centre? Thank you.
So yeah, yes is the answer. What's probably formerly known as the Loop Road in the city centre, we are planning and delivering a fully segregated cycle infrastructure on that section of highway, which then goes around the pedestrian core to mitigate some of the concerns. But I think that is the answer, essentially: high quality, fully segregated cycle infrastructure. I think that a lot of the time when cyclists are probably choosing to go on the footway, it's because they probably feel unsafe themselves on the highway. So providing quality, high-spec, segregated infrastructure is the answer as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, because as a new back to cyclists, I find that there are so many parts where you just kind of stop and start with cycle lanes and infrastructure as well, and it does make it really tricky if you are kind of, you know, just getting your confidence back with cycling around the city.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Can I go to page 63 and paragraph 22? Because we've discussed about how the implications of the street charter are that perhaps resources might need to be looked at in a different way, potentially, or extra resources sought by different departments on the council. And it talks about governance functions and whatever. So there's a lot to do. That sort of sums it all up, doesn't it, in that paragraph? There's a lot to do in terms of different departments looking at where they feel they should respond to what's being raised in the street charter. And in terms of governance of that, who would be responsible for monitoring what is delivered in that? Now, I know that we do have disability hubs and equality hubs that are run by Jeff and his team. And there are... so I'd like some clarification from Jeff in terms of where some of this governance oversight might come from. But before we get to that one, I just wanted to understand, we just talked there about how, well, to keep bikes off the paths, we need to spend many, many thousands of pounds to deliver segregated bike infrastructure. And we have had some very spectacular cycle-orientated investment in the city. I think there was one in Headingley that cost £10 million. However, I think the budget for the section which looks after introducing dropped curbs in the city has a budget of £100,000 a year. How do we look at and how do we check the equity in terms of where we decide to spend our money for specific groups of people? So cyclists get 10 million, disabled people get £100,000. I know that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. How do we look at that when we're looking at our budget overall at the beginning of the year? And do we need to develop something to enable that kind of equality overview going forward?
Yeah, perhaps if I have a go at that one. So our funding mainly comes through from grant from the Combined Authority, and those funds are associated with significant criteria of where money is spent. So that would be the first point I'd make. I'd also go back to the 10 million versus 100,000 comment that you made, Chair, in terms of, yeah, that is a simplistic view because, as I said in my introduction, we will seek to address issues that are known to us as part of our larger scheme work, be that maintenance work that's ongoing in an area, and we do over 600 major schemes each year on maintenance, or some of our major schemes, transport schemes, that come out of transport strategy and are funded by WICA. We will seek to pick up access issues as part of those schemes. So, as they are known to us. We've also done recently, I think it's relevant here, the Healthier Streets for All consultation with all community committees across the city, where we've asked for residents, councillors, partners to identify issues across the city, transport related, highways related. Although that's a recent consultation and feedback is still being collated and summarised and will help feed into programmes of work in due course. I'm giving you general cover points to show that we do think about this in a broader sense, and it isn't just 100,000 versus 10 million. It is taken into account on a broader footing than that.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. It was just to identify the potential for a capital scheme going forward. I know, for instance, when parks were looking at the maintenance of their community parks and they discovered that they had quite a big backlog in terms of health and safety, they did manage to get £1 million in capital to address that. As part of the budget settlement. I just think it's worth looking into because the same kind of argument might be made for the backlog in disability infrastructure that isn't being delivered anytime soon.
If I may, Chair, I'd be interested certainly to see the Healthier Streets for All consultation across the city and to see what has come out of that and whether it can be subdivided into, for the want of a better word, buckets or areas of work, which then might prompt a specific request into the council for a specific pot of money. I think that would be interesting to see that, and I await the feedback.
Jeff, I put you off. Are you going to come back on the governance issue?
Yeah. The Equality Assembly and the Equality Hubs wouldn't really be governance. They would be consultation and engagement, which we are committed to continue to do. Obviously, there was specific consultation and engagement done about this piece of work, and you'll see in the report a wide range of stakeholders, but the Disability Hub, which is part of our Equality Assembly, have been really, really interested in this piece of work for a considerable amount of time. In fact, it's top of their list of things that they're constantly wanting updates on. So in terms of consulting and engaging with them on how it's being implemented, then they would be a really good platform. We also have our Access and Usability group, which tends to look at new schemes, but also will have an interest in the ongoing implementation of access issues. So in terms of consultation engagement, yeah, absolutely, we've got the platform there. I think what's really important is that we do ensure that we report back on this, so it doesn't just become a nice thing that we've signed up to, that all the services individually who are going to be asked to take accountability of their commitments that they're making in this have some sort of an opportunity to feedback on how they feel that they are doing, and then from the consultation engagement side we'll get the feel from disabled people, also older people. So this is a big issue for the Older People's Hub, which is run for us by Leeds Older People's Forum. So we can get loads of feedback from that side, but I do think we need a reporting mechanism for services as well. And it mentions a couple of potential opportunities. Obviously, we do have the annual report, which comes to Executive Board in July every year, but obviously also this Scrutiny Board could potentially continue to ask for updates through the performance management part of your agenda.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Anderson.
As a council, have we ever considered wardens that can enforce more than one thing? In other words, parking wardens tend to deal with just parking things. Environmental enforcement people tend to enforce just environmental things. But if we gave them each authority to do work on the other one, and also when it comes to highways officers, a number of times I've been out with the highways officer in my area and we've noticed a problem. Now, why can't he be authorised to issue a ticket there and then? Because he admits it's a problem. Then he's got to come back in again and try and justify to some of the senior officers present here as to why the one in my area should deserve greater priority than somewhere else. But why can't we look at skilling up some of our council officers who are out and about doing other things to give them the capacity to do that at the same time? Now, is there any legal reason why we can't do it? Does it come down to skills, or does it come down to cost of training these people up? Because to finally follow up on that, as part of the old Outer Northwest, we asked Mark Jefford, could we employ an additional parking warden? And we were told it was going to cost us about £35,000, give or take. And then he then equated that to how many tickets you would need to issue on a daily basis. We never ever took it forward. Is that something that, in other words, the argument was that it would be zero cost because it would actually make money for the council, depending on how many tickets they issued. Have we ever looked at that for this wider implementation here? Because I agree with what you're saying, but resources being the problem, is that a solution to it or not?
Councillor Martin.
Thanks for that question. My understanding is that in Hunslet and Riverside, for example, the councillors and the neighbouring wards, the councillors there have funded some parking enforcement officers who are also environmental protection officers or environmental enforcement officers. So that does happen in Leeds.
I think the issue around enforcement is something that needs a deeper dive, and I'm not sure if it's in our remit. It is? Oh, okay, great. Yes, we can certainly send comments to the enforcement section in terms of looking at areas of inquiry for us that we think would be useful to add value to this piece of work. But to get back to this piece of work and the end of our discussion, the recommendation is a bit weird. for me, because we're not an executive function. So in terms of the recommendations that are in here, but I'm sure we're happy to support the recommendations that are in here, but I'm not sure if we're the body that gets them implemented. I'm not sure if this needs to go to executive board or not.
You can make the recommendations in terms of recommending that these things happen, but can't make a decision.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite happy to support the recommendations that are in here, and for the Scrutiny Board to support ongoing work in terms of looking at how these can be best implemented from the disparate departments that are associated with it. And I'll bring you in a second, and that we will look at enforcement in particular in terms of trying to find an outcome which is amenable. Councillor Flint.
Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of how this piece of work is formally adopted, I'm keen for this to be brought forward after the 3 months where it goes back to department. So we're looking at it going to Exec Board as a joint report before the elections and the period before,
Oh, that's really good news, thank you. So glad we've been able to be part of that progress. Councillor Haigh.
Yeah, I think given the amount of work that's going to take place, I think a recommendation that we review this, if it's adopted at Exec Board, probably 12 months after that.
Is that soon enough for you, Jeff? Very good. That was a resounding nod. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Councillor Haigh. And Becky has made note of that. So, yes, thank you very much. And hopefully next time it comes to us, we will have some people from the Disability Hub to discuss what difference it has made. So thank you for those attending today, and in particular for the officers from the Highways Department who took on the responsibility of putting this report together on behalf of the corporate whole. So thanks very much indeed, and I call the meeting to an end. Oh, next meeting is what? January the 15th. See you there, I'll be square.
I think so. Because it's the most formalised.